Recording in progress. Not too bad.
Good evening, everyone. The February 25th, 2021 Whatcom County Planning Commission meeting is called to order. I'll call the roll, please. Tell if you are here. Robert Bartel.
Here.
Kelvin Barton, that's me, I am here. Atul Desmani.
Here.
Jim Hansen.
Here.
Stephen Jackson. Not getting an answer from Stephen Jackson. Kimberly Lund.
Here.
We got
Here.
from Steve and from Kimberly. John Mayberry.
Here.
Natalie McClendon.
Here.
Dominic Mosseri.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Please join me for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. So now is time, Director Personius, to give a department update. Go ahead, Mark. Did we lose Mark?
Hey, can you guys see me and hear me? Okay, good. Sorry, you kind of got frozen there for a second. Good evening, commissioners. I don't have much for you on the department update. Just one thing, council on Tuesday night adopted the new 2021 docket. And just as it relates to other issues on the agenda for tonight, 8 new items were added to our work program. In addition to the 21 already on the work program. And one of those was an initiative from the county council to docket to request PDS review and revise the Whatcom County Code relating to marijuana growing and processing in rural areas. To consider impacts of marijuana growing and processing facilities in rural areas and evaluate growing and processing facilities as an agricultural or non-agricultural use, and to consider compatibility with GMA and the county comprehensive plan. So just in so far as any conversations or deliberations you guys have tonight regarding marijuana, that's already docketed, and so we'll be putting that on the docket to which means, of course, we would come back with a public review process through you guys, through the planning commission, when we get there and have those conversations. So that's all I've got for you guys, unless you guys have any questions.
Are there any questions for Mark?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Desmani.
So the draft motion that we're looking at today, would that be a proposal to amend the docketed item then?
No, the motion that's in your packet, or the potential motion regards a moratorium. That's different.
Yeah, so
That motion is to request the council to consider establishing a moratorium on the acceptance of existing applications. That doesn't have anything to do with the docket.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for Mark? Thank you, Mark. Now is the time or open session for public comment. And we are, there's a 3-minute limit, and our planning commission coordinator will be timing you, and she'll give you tell you when you have 30 seconds left. For those that you that are speaking from your phone, if you hit *9, it will raise your hand, and then *6 will unmute. If you're on your computer, there is a raise hand button. So, at any rate, I see a hand up, and I am not able to tell who it is. Let's see, it ends in 199 on the phone number. So go ahead, you have 3 minutes. State who you are and where you, more or less where you're from. And go ahead.
Excuse me, Kelvin, may I ask a question? So we have marijuana on the agenda. Are the open session comments going to involve that, or other issues that aren't on the agenda?
We have it on the agenda, but it's it was a question I asked. Is it a hearing item, or is it just an item on the agenda? And it was recommended that we let participants talk during open session.
So, okay, just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Didn't exactly answer your question, but I'm trying to. Anyway, go ahead.
You want me to speak now?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. My name is Rainbow Medicine Walker. I live in Kendall. Skagit County ordinance states that marijuana production and processing facilities are not compatible with the rural landscape and rural residential communities. According to Washington State RCW, cannabis is not agriculture. Whatcom County classifies cannabis as commercial, not agriculture. Our county does not appear to have the infrastructure to adequately regulate cannabis production and processing in rural areas. Officials from various state regulatory agencies have told me they are limited in their own enforcement powers, and it is therefore up to Whatcom County to restrict where and how these marijuana facilities are allowed to operate. I was told today that the regulatory powers of the Cannabis Board inspector have basically been halved, meaning half the number of inspectors, half the dollar amount for fines levied, half the number of things that are now considered a serious violation, etc. For instance, the Saturn Group 5 to 7 times 4-acre overgrow revealed by the Google Earth image recently circulated to this commission would only result in a $500 fine. I have been told it is likely that hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional profit were made on that single overgrow. It is easy to understand why cannabis producers would have little to no incentive to follow the state regulations. Tier grow size restrictions appear to be quite flexible and not enforced. Water usage limits can seemingly be ignored and not enforced. All-night lighting and constant noise from industrial exhaust fans, security alarms, and other machinery interfere with residents' sleep. Armed guards imply and or threaten violence to passersby. Odor problems are persistent and pervasive. We need an emergency moratorium on all marijuana production and processing facilities. This moratorium needs to include both indoor and outdoor, as well as both large and small operations. It appears there is some overlap in definition between indoor and outdoor cannabis greenhouses. This makes it even more important that the codes be reviewed in regards to both indoor and outdoor facilities. Because of concerns of expansion, we ask very, very urgently that this emergency moratorium be declared, put on the county docket. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I am showing next is Roger Olmsgar. Roger, would you go ahead and speak? We're trying to get you there.
Myself. Okay, thank you.
Go.
Now, is it legitimate to make a few comments on the critical area ordinance tonight in open session? I'm not sure if that's yes or no.
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to make a few comments. I'm speaking on behalf of the Government Affairs Committee of the Whatcom County Building Industry Association. And we've started to get more serious about this issue. It's an important one. And you may know that we lost our government affairs person, Jacqueline Sterna, about the beginning of the year. So it's been a real problem to catch up because we were really, she was doing a lot of good work for us. Critical area policies and rules are a major factor in the cost and availability of housing and also in business and job creation. I think I'll try to be, I've only got 3 minutes. So my main comment is about the reasonable use code. And I do appreciate that the Planning Commission supported the 4,000 square foot limit at your last discussion on this. And but we believe that a larger footprint could be allowed in some cases, for instance, on a 40 acre parcel of land that was not going to be subdivided, or 20 acres or something like that. We're starting to write up a suggestion on that. It's not something you can do in half an hour. Also, I'd like to see, or we would like to see, the reasonable use decision. This may be the most important thing I'm going to say. We'd like to see that decision made by the staff and not the hearing examiner. The way the draft is now written, someone who finds they need a reasonable use decision, they have to go through. Yes. Yes. Pardon?
Yep. Down a little bit.
I think somebody's bleeding on you, Roger.
My time is up. Is that what you're saying?
No, we were getting interference from some other noise coming through. But go ahead and pick up where you were at about, you were saying the staff.
Okay, it's all quiet here. So I'll wrap this up. I think perhaps the most important issue on this right now on reasonable use is that if a person feels they have to use that process, they first have to apply to the county for a variance, whether it's a mini or a major, and go through the hearing examiner process, and then they have to be turned down there. So then their next step is to go through the same process again for a reasonable use. And I don't think that makes very much sense from anybody's point of view. That I think we'd like to see that change somewhat. So I think the fees it would be a very expensive process. It'd take a lot of time. So also I'm going to send in a letter on this. You'll probably get it early next week. Is Cliff Strong here?
Yeah. Tammy was saying that your time is up, and we would welcome a letter, Roger. You can send that in.
Okay. Well, I guess there is a time limit, isn't there? I mean, I don't want to, pardon?
Yes,
So I probably used it up by now.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. Well, appreciate that. I'm reading from a draft of a letter here that I've been working on for a few days, and it's difficult. What my last comment is this whole subject of land use, environmental regulation has gotten so complicated, so many different rules and codes and this and that it's really very difficult, very challenging for a person that's even been in the field for over 40 years. So, okay, I'm done. So goodbye now.
Interrupt, but thank you. I'm glad you called in, and I do want to just a moment here. Let me just looking here, make sure I'm not missing anybody. All right. Commissioner Ludd, did you have a question for Roger?
No, I just had a question on our process about why we're allowing comments on an agenda item on the critical areas, chapter 16.
Because we don't have a scheduled hearing. And so in the open session for public comment, they can talk on anything that doesn't have a hearing scheduled for it at this time. So that's why we're allowing it. Did you want to ask more? Commissioner London, did we lose you?
No, I'm here.
Okay,
So what you're saying, Kelvin, is that we won't invite public comment later on at
we,
conclusion of our adoption of the proposed changes? Wouldn't that be the appropriate time, I guess, is my question.
we will have a hearing, but we don't have one scheduled tonight, so they're allowed to talk. Public is allowed to talk on anything that we don't have a hearing scheduled during open session for public comment.
Can I comment?
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner.
So in other I'm trying to lower my hand here. In other multi-meeting processes, we have allowed comment just in the course of our, beginning our discussion of the agenda item, but we haven't put it in the open session. And I think it's important to separate the open session where it's other issues that people want to bring up from the comments that are on our agenda. I'm wholly in support of giving people opportunity to bring comments on our agenda items because we're doing it week after week after week on the same issue. We need to be continuing to get feedback from people, but I think we need to keep it separate from the open session. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Well, and that's maybe it's something that we should have a discussion about. This is one I checked with our director last meeting and asked when the appropriate time was, and he said that the public can use this open session for public comment for items that we're not having hearings on at this time. So, well, we lost you, Commissioner McClendon. We lost your volume.
What?
We lost your volume.
I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I didn't say anything.
Okay. What I'm showing, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Desmani.
So maybe what I'd like to suggest is that we take the 3-minute comments from people that don't have something to say on our agenda. Then and then in the work session, we allow people who are, as we've done in the past, people who are experts in the field to provide input while we're doing the work session. That's what I'd suggest, and that would be consistent with our prior customary practice. And although I certainly value the input of our excellent PDS staff, it's our meeting, not their meeting. So we do have to run this meeting and the procedure and the parliamentary practices out of all respect for staff.
Well, so what are you saying we do at this time? Because we have run this way for a while. And this was staff's opinion on it. And
Mr. Chair?
go ahead.
So I think your rules state that the public comment period is intended for the public to comment on things that are not on the agenda tonight. And if there is not a public hearing scheduled, obviously, then that's another opportunity for folks to comment specifically on an agenda item that has a public hearing. So, but what is in the past, there has been a lot of interest, from the public on certain items. And so it's really at the discretion of the council, the commission, on any given night, if you want to relax those rules a little bit and let folks talk, if you think it's informational to you, if it helps you in your deliberations, if it provides information to you that helps you in your decision making, those are within your discretion, certainly.
So I'll read the, what our rules are is open session for public comment provides an opportunity for any member of the public to speak to the planning commission for 3 minutes on any topic except items that are scheduled on the agenda for a public hearing that same day. Items that have had a public hearing and are still under deliberation by the planning commission. The time, and then it goes into that we can extend it and so on. But those are the 2 exceptions that you can't talk about something that's scheduled for a public hearing the same day and items that have had a public hearing. But our rules are the open session for public comment or open for everything else. Just reading it. So I think we still have some people that would like to talk, at least one, that would be Eliza Steele. Eliza, would you go ahead?
Hi, can everyone hear me? Everyone hear me okay? Okay, hi. My name is Eliza Steele and I live in Deming. And I just wanted to speak real quick, it's not going to be too long, on the emergency moratorium for marijuana production and producers. You know, through kind of unraveling a lot of information based on a local situation, it's become really clear that there's pretty rampant lack of regulation going on with these grows, as kind of Rainbow talked about a bit earlier. And this is across many different departments. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that it's on the docket and it's going to be getting addressed this year. I don't really know the time frame on that, but I still feel an emergency moratorium is very needed in this situation, just in how all the different applications that are going to be coming in the meantime are going to get grandfathered in. And then it's kind of just, you know, continuing on these issues that actually are becoming more and more known that it's county-wide, that this is going on for indoor and outdoor grows. And like I said, this all kind of revealed itself based upon looking at a localized situation, but I don't feel like anyone else should really have to go through this. And if it can be kind of halted until all this gets figured out, I absolutely think that that would be something that the Planning Commission would be able to do. And I thank you all.
Thank you. Todd Baker, go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Hi, my name's Todd Baker and I live at 6336 Mount Baker Highway, kind of Deming, Kendall area. And I too would like to see an emergency moratorium placed on indoor and outdoor grows, expansions of existing grows. I just think that we need more oversight, more, research into rules and regulations, more coordination with other agencies. And I think that maybe the council and planning commission should think about, I don't know if that, whose job it is to add funds for possibly adding positions or whatever it takes to enforce some rules. Right now, when I talk to the planning department enforcement people, I said, I'm just curious about, stuff that's going on and would like it to be looked at. And the guy told me that, there's 400 cases and he can't go out and look at everything. So that leads me to believe that we have a problem. We need to add some positions or prioritize. So until this stuff can get looked at, I think we need an emergency moratorium. And especially so that we can, there's critical areas involved and not a lot of oversight when it comes to that. There's different agencies that are involved and it seems like the state can give you a license. And then we have to deal with the issues and the county has to deal with the issues. And I just don't think that the existing laws that are in place or the existing regulations in Whatcom County are ready to handle that. And I think we need to take a look at it. And I would love to see an emergency moratorium for not only new ones, but existing ones that want to expand. I think it's time to look at them before we say yes to any of that. And I think, I just mimic what the other two people have said. And I just don't want to see our communities be ruined. But that's what I've got. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Desmani, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the gentleman if who he spoke to regarding the enforcement people.
I talked to Garrett from the planning department.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Haga, go ahead.
Thank you. I live at 6338 Mount Baker Highway, next to a pot farm. And I called last month and talked, and I just wanted to follow up on what I had said about odors, if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead and continue.
Okay, so I looked up in the RCW, first of all, to talk about, because there was some discussion about whether or not it's considered agriculture, and you probably already found that in the research, but I discovered that it expressly states that agricultural product does not include marijuana. And it states also that the terms agriculture, farming, and horticulture may not be construed to include or relate to marijuana unless the term is explicitly defined to include marijuana. Now, what I kind of read out of that is something that I think could help the county with its enforcement efforts, and that is basically saying you don't have to consider it agricultural unless the county or a city decides to explicitly define it as agricultural. It is not considered agricultural by the state. So you don't have an onus to do that. So I'm looking at it and saying it seems like it's very difficult for the county to enforce this because of the complexity of it. And it would be a lot easier to enforce if it were not considered agriculture, because it wouldn't be out among people so much if it were considered as industrial or light industrial, commercial, something like that, and kept to indoor grow operations, because the state also says that it has to be regulated by the Puget Sound Clean Energy or Clean Air Agency for odor control. And you can't really effectively do that with an outdoor grow. So it would seem to me growing in greenhouses that have carbon filtered fans would make that a whole lot easier to police than when it's out in the open and the smell is floating everywhere. So I hope that the county will consider that, and it might also considerably lighten your enforcement burden and as well as complaint burden, because I don't think you're under any pressure from the state to even regard marijuana as being agricultural. I grew up on a dairy farm, and I'm used to smells of agriculture, and I love agriculture, but I think dairy is deeply rooted in our culture. Marijuana is not, and its odor is a lot different to me. It's pervasive, it hangs around, manure comes and it goes as it's applied. But my experience living here next to this 4.5 acre pot farm is the smell is there consistently for 9 months out of the year.
Hold on a minute, David. Commissioner Desmani, did you have a question?
I don't hear him.
Go ahead, try again, Commissioner Desmani.
Sorry, I have a question for Director Personius. Specifically, does Whatcom County define marijuana as explicitly as agriculture?
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Ed Miller, go ahead and address the question. We're trying to get there for you, Ed. There we go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to speak really briefly per your comments. I'm a local wetland biologist. I work here. I won't speak too much now. I just wanted to let you know that I'm in the meeting, and I guess I'll wait to the critical areas section when you want to discuss it, and I could be available to answer any questions you might have. I obviously do have some concerns about some of the changes. Another local wetland biologist, Liliana Hansen, is also in the meeting, so thought you would just let you know. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. David, did you have more to say to us? You kind of interrupted there.
Only if you had questions like where that's found in the RCW, if you need anything like that.
Okay, we appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Now is the time for commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments? Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, last meeting I was asked to reach out to the development community to get comments from them and have them weigh in or be a resource for us at meetings. So I reached out to the Building Association of Whatcom County, just to let you know.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I reached out to Ed Miller over the week. So also I noticed we had a couple attendee hands pop up right as we moved into commissioner comments. I don't know if you want to go back to them or not, but
I appreciate that. We will, looks like we've gone and I will get to them, but let's go ahead and finish this and then we'll go back to them. Do you have anything more to say, Commissioner Mayberry?
nope, that was it. Just talk to Ed.
Commissioner Gasmani.
Two things. First thing is that I attended today a training put on by Jurassic Parliament that specifically was catered for planning commissions. It was a 1-hour session. It was put on by Ann McFarland. And I have to say, it's the best training I've taken. And it's, all of our stuff is fantastic. It's available on demand. I think the chair might have been interested in it, but the county is paying for it for anybody who wants to see it. So I encourage you all. It's a really an effective 1-hour session that's fun, educational, and will allow you to give Kelvin a lots of trouble during our meetings. So it's worth it just for that. Just kidding, Kelvin. The other item is, of course, we're the other topic is, of course, we're discussing marijuana in the first part of our meeting today, and I wanted to apologize to the Planning Commission. It's a subject that I wasn't realizing would end up becoming this much of a thing this early, but I'm glad because we're serving the community. But I just want to let you know that it's my fault to some degree. And of course, the community very much wants to have this dealt with. So thank you.
Where was that video?
So that video, Tammy has all the details on it, as does Kelvin. And so if you all are interested, Ann McFarland, the creator of the program, will do a group rate for the Planning Commission. So you can all get it.
Commissioner Lund.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I spoke with Carly from Resources, who's an attendee tonight, looks like, in advance of this meeting. And I just wanted to clarify that my comment earlier was not to dissuade public engagement or comment. I've really appreciated reading all the emails and public comments in advance of our meeting. I just want to make sure that we're consistently applying our rules. During like the Cherry Point, none of our work sessions did we allow public comments for items on the agenda. And so when we were going through that process. And so I just want to make sure we have a consistent interpretation so people know when they can and cannot engage with us. So my comments are more along that line and just being consistent.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, I did not speak, but I emailed FutureWise, Resources, David Stahlheim, and Wendy Harris yesterday to give interested technical people a heads up that there were a number of amendments that were brought to our attention only yesterday, hoping that they might have a chance to have some, oops, there's my face, have a chance to have some input into this process. I'm kind of uncomfortable seeing all these amendments the day before, we need to make this, we may need to make decisions on them.
Okay, we're gonna go back and get the two attendees that wanted to speak. And it looks like, was it Holly first? Okay, Holly Kuhn, go ahead. Oh, she's still. To unmute, if you're on your phone, I believe.
There we go. Nope, I got it. There we go. Thank you. I did pre-register to speak, so I'm not sure why that didn't show up. I apologize for you having to backtrack. So I'm Holly Kuhn, and I spoke to you at the last meeting on the need for the emergency moratorium. And I continue to believe, even more so than I did as I've done more research, that this pause is critical. But before I continue, I really, Commissioner Deshmani claimed responsibility for sort of getting you all into this fix, but I wanted to extend my sincere gratitude for something that I really seldom witnessed in the literally hundreds of public policy meetings I've sat through, and that is your genuine and active listening to public input. I know we weren't what you expected to come your way, and yet you all have pivoted with such grace and true curiosity, and in my experience, that's pretty unprecedented. So I just wanted to start by thanking you for that and your active engagement. You've had, I think, a fair amount of written input with a lot of details, and I would really encourage you to look at those, not because I think enforcement is your job, but because the local situation that some of us have found ourselves in could really help illuminate the jurisdictional tangle that can be presented by these large grow operations. And I think as more counties around the state take a second look at their ordinances, and as we see more money in marijuana and we see more places in the country legalizing marijuana, the potential for big outside business interests to take a look at counties where these large operations are allowed and enforcement is poor. I just think that is something that we're going to see in our future. One of the things that I've done in the interim is I wanted to take a look at some of the other processes that counties have gone through. And one that really caught my eye, and I would encourage you to look at it, Whitman County just the last week of December adopted a new marijuana ordinance after a 2-year extensive process. And when I started looking at the transcripts of their public meetings, I was like, I don't think this is the one I want to cherry pick to make my point. It's page after page after page of experts testifying about things like how the smell from marijuana, large grows, is actually beneficial to health and how it benefits the economy and blah, 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 blah. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. And yet their end result is they have completely prohibited outdoor growing in Whitman County. And the reason that they did that is because when they looked at the potential trouble for enforcement and the cost of enforcement to the county and the impact on all the other county residents around it compared to the benefit to the county in terms of taxes and in terms of providing jobs, it just did not parse out at all. So I would really encourage you to take a look at the process they went to. It's the most extensive one that I could find, and I can send you some of those links. One final question that I kind of wanted to leave you with. I know that there's a question about applications that are currently in the pipeline in Vesture of some of the growers and the applications. And
so Holly, we've run out of time there. If you can get up in one sentence, please.
I can, actually. It's a question. So if a property owner is flagrantly and knowingly violating the ordinance, law, or rule at the very moment in time that they claim they vested under that ordinance, law, or rule, are they actually vested?
Okay, all right. We need to go on the next one. Thank you. Rosemart Van Beek.
Yes, I live on Zell Road in Ferndale, and we've got a grow operation apparently across the road from my driveway, basically. These are 5-acre pieces, single family dwellings. I've called everybody imaginable. There's no permit. There's no, with the drug enforcement, there's no permit with the county. Where do you go to get any help to find out, how to stop it if it's single family dwellings? And I mean, I've called every agency imaginable. That's where I am with this.
Hey, I'm not sure I can answer that. Mark, Persones, if you're still on, do you have an answer for that question?
All I can say is the county is probably not getting any money or any taxes off of this with no permits whatsoever.
And
we have no records of any permitted grow op or licensed grow op on Zell Road. So I would suggest to the commenter that that's likely, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's very possible it's an illegal grow, right? They don't have a state license and they don't have any county permits. They're just growing marijuana illegally. So in that case, your option is to contact the sheriff's office or the drug enforcement agency.
I've contacted both. I've got no results whatsoever. I've been through probably 12 agencies so far. That's what I'm saying. Where does a resident go if it's an illegal operation and nobody's taking responsibility for it?
Rosemart, if you'll hold a minute, Commissioner Desmani, go ahead.
So I would also like Director Persones to address the prior question that Holly Kuhn ended with, which is what happens in the case of vesting if an operator is not following the law.
The commenter alleges that they're not following the law. I mean, determining a violation is a legal action. It's a legal course of law, and there's a process involved in it. So simply alleging that someone is doing something illegally needs to be proven in court. And so there's a whole process, a legal process that has to occur, and that's quite one of the huge challenges to enforcement is gaining access to properties to prove and to gain adequate evidence of a violation. And we don't go storming into people's properties. We don't have that right. So if someone doesn't grant us access, if we can't see it, if we can't prove it, then we can't prove that there's a violation. So, and you got to remember, in the state licensing laws, these outdoor grow operations and indoor grow operations are meant to be not seen, right? They are required to be behind a site obscuring fence. They are required to be inside of a building. So they're not intended to be seen visually by anybody. And so if you can't see them, and that goes for code enforcement officers as well, if we can't see it, we can't prove it, and we can't get access. And if we're denied access by the property owner, it puts real limitations and constraints on our ability to enforce. So,
thank you.
So the property owner is just out of luck. The person having the problem is just out of luck.
Rosemart, would you hold this for another minute? Commissioner McClendon, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question or speak? Okay. All right, go ahead, Rosemart, continue.
Okay.
She just unmuted.
Okay. Commissioner McClendon, do you want
What
to?
Mr. Persones was saying was referring to the planning department enforcement. But the sheriff certainly has the authority to get a warrant to enter people's property. And I don't understand if there really is, if you have any reasonable evidence that there is an illegal growing operation, I don't understand why the sheriff wouldn't do something about it. That puzzles me.
I didn't understand it either, but I started with the sheriff. I started with the fire department for odor control, because it's the odor that is getting us over here in our area. It is very sickening when the wind especially is coming out of the east toward my property. And that's where we even started noticing it, was the smell was so pungent that it made me physically ill for 3 days just trying to be in my yard.
30 seconds.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Let's move on. Approval of minutes. And it was suggested to me that perhaps we would like to, we have another attendee there. What do we have there?
Something blinking.
We're fine. The computer on this end.
Oh, she's trying right here. Wendy.
Oh. Wendy Harris, did you wish to talk? Okay. We'll go and approve the minutes, and it was
I would
suggested.
like to talk.
Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to kind of respond to what Roger said about reasonable use, because that's been a concern of mine as well. One of my weird habits is I go and I read the CEPAs that are issued to get a sense of what's going on. And I see those cases coming up and they concern me. I have been told by planning staff that they interpret our code as requiring that they issue reasonable use permits if land is constricted by wetlands, for example, that an owner just purchased. And that the reason there's a reasonable use provision when we have a variance provision is that they're different. Reasonable use only applies where there's going to be a taking by the government if we go through with whatever the normal regulations are. And I can assure you that happens almost 0% of the time. And if there is a taking that would happen, constructive taking, we would basically, what the advice is from what the law is, that you have to allow use of the property, but only to the minimum amount to avoid a taking. So 4,000 square feet is insane because you don't have to allow the most, the highest and best use of the land. You just have to allow some use of the land. And I mean, for BIA to be talking about wanting even more when we're already violating the GMA would not be in the public's best interest. And what's been happening as a practical matter is that some, smart, sophisticated developers that have been around are deliberately going out and buying swamplands that they wouldn't otherwise be able to develop, and then having them treated like reasonable use. And we're basically losing wetlands that should be preserved because of this incorrect interpretation of reasonable use. So I want you to know there's a very different side to the story, and it's very serious, and that needs to be considered as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. All right, approval of minutes. It was suggested that we might want to approve them as a group, being as that there are 7 here. So, Henry, whatever you would like to do, commissioners. Commissioner Lund.
Normally, I would abstain from approving minutes for meetings at which I was an attendee. And so if we do a batch approval, I'm split between being present and absent. So I'm just kind of wondering best process for that.
Okay. And I have no problem either way. Would someone like to make a motion to approve May 9th of 19?
I'll make a motion to approve the May 9th, 2019 meeting minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second.
And who was that? Commissioner Jackson?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any discussion, any correction? Tammy, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Abstain.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
8 ayes, 1 abstain.
So, would someone like to make a motion for July 25th, 19 minutes? Commissioner Mayberry.
I will move to approve July 25, 19 minutes.
I'll second that.
Are there any corrections or discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Deschmonte,
Abstain.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Abstain.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri, Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
and Commissioner Barton.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is 7 ayes, 2 abstaining. Carried.
Okay, someone would like to make a motion for the next one?
I'll make a motion to approve the July 23rd, 2020 meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there any corrections, any discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Deschmonte,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Abstain.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, 8 ayes, 1 abstaining, carries.
And August 13th, the next one. Someone like to make a motion? Commissioner
I'll
Lund?
make a motion to approve the August 13th, 2020 meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Are there any corrections or discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Deschmonte,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That carries 9-0.
Okay. A motion for the next one, September 10th.
I'll
I'll
move,
make a mo, go ahead, John.
I'll move to approve September 10, 2020 minutes.
I'll second.
Are there any corrections or discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Deschmonte,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Abstain.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
8 ayes, 1 abstaining, that carries.
We have a motion for the next one. 2024.
I'll move to approve the September 24th, 2020 minutes.
Second that.
Second.
Are there any corrections or discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Abstain.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, 8 ayes with 1 abstaining. Carries.
One last one.
Move to adopt October 8th, 2020 minutes.
I'll second that.
Do we have any corrections or discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Abstain?
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Abstain.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
7 ayes, 2 abstaining. That carries.
All right. So now we are to marijuana production and processing regulation. Cliff, are you on there? I'm not seeing you, but. Oh, there we are. Cliff, would you go ahead?
I'm on, but I thought Mark was handling this part, so.
Dan, I saw your memo from earlier, so let me, Director Personius, would you go ahead and present?
Yeah, so Cliff put a memo in the packet for you guys, kind of outlining showing you our existing regulations. I think regulations from Skagit County in San Juan, just based on the conversations from the last time. And I know you have a lot on your agenda tonight, so I want to be real brief with this. I want to give you just a brief overview on kind of the scenarios here about how marijuana is regulated and or addressed. And then we included, as I said earlier, council's already docketed directive to us to undertake reviewing and revising the regs. And so we'll do that. So it's not necessary for us to get into the weeds tonight, excuse my pun, about marijuana or the pros and cons of different approaches and whatnot. I want to tell you a little bit about the issues and how they're addressed and what some of the challenges are. And then we've included a potential motion if you wanted to recommend to council to adopt a moratorium on the acceptance of any new applications. So really there's 3 scenarios, when you think about marijuana, there's and number 1 is kind of the one we talked about a little bit earlier with the public commenter, illegal grows that are illegal. They're just folks growing marijuana without a state license and without any county permits. We don't regulate, PDS doesn't regulate those, that's a law enforcement issue. So you would take that up with the sheriff's department or the drug enforcement agency or whoever. The second scenario is where the state or the LCB, the Liquor Cannabis Board, licenses a marijuana operation. But the operator, they get a state license, but they haven't necessarily gotten their county permits that might be required as a part of that. And then the third scenario, and the one most common, and really what we're talking about, is where the operator has a state license and has county permits with per our current regulations. So I talked about the first scenario. The second scenario, there's a handful of those. There's a few of those that get their state license. They don't necessarily have a county permits. When we find out about those from the state, we send those folks a letter, follow up with them and say, hey, you need to get these permits, depending on what zone they're in, and so forth. We get voluntary compliance out of most of those people. There have been a couple, I think, that again, as we've talked about with our enforcement issues, have denied us access, or we just haven't been able to get evidence to enforce on those permits. So I want to focus on the third one, which are the regs, right? And where we get most of our complaints. And I'll say we've only had, I think, 4 complaints countywide about marijuana growing and processing operations. So just so you know that. Those issues are primarily around odor and lights, okay? And so odor is the way the regs are written and the way the council adopted these regulations back in 2015, and the Planning Commission at the time recommended as well, was that marijuana be treated as a agricultural activity, little a, okay, not agriculture in the legal sense, because as speakers have said, and as I've said, the state statutes are very clear. It's not agriculture, and it's not agriculture because it's taxed by the state at various levels of growing and production and processing and retail. And so where other agricultural crops are not. So they had to make a very clear distinction that legally it's not agriculture. But nevertheless, the county council at the time wanted to regulate marijuana as an little a agricultural activity because it was growing a crop, right? So they just wanted a sort of a bit of a hands-off approach. At least when it came to outdoor grows. So there's a big distinction. There's an indoor grow and there's an outdoor grow, and they're treated differently in the code. Odor control is specifically required for indoor grows, right? You have to have as you'll see in the code in your packet, you have to have the system, filtration system that's designed and stamped by a licensed state engineer. Most of those use carbon filters for those folks that do indoor grows. Outdoor grows do not require odor control, right? And of course, it's much more difficult to do odor control on outdoor grows, if not impossible. So the code doesn't require that. And again, that's where council was like, well, it's an agricultural activity, just like, you know, agriculture that has right to farm protections, right, from odors, manure spreading, and so forth, that we're not gonna, those are impacts that are just go along with that use, and you know, we're not gonna regulate those. So that's kind of the regulatory approach that's taken with the code. Now, you've heard speakers in some counties have particularly counties that adopted their regulations later in the process. We adopted ours pretty earlier in the process. Some of the later counties have prohibited outdoor grows because of some of those odor concerns, or there wasn't adequate technology available, and/or the technology is extremely expensive to do odor mitigation for outdoor grows. The other part of that is that most of the outdoor grows occur in hoop houses, right? So, or what are called non-rigid greenhouses per the building code. And those are not considered a structure that requires a permit under the building code, and therefore they're not regulated, and we don't require odor control measures for hoop houses. And so that's, you know, that may be an option that we could look at, looking at those regulations as we go forward. But anyway, as of the current time, those don't have an odor control aspect to them. So the other issue is lighting. We do have regulations in the code that require that the lighting be reflected downward and not onto adjacent properties and or public roads. And we've had just a couple complaints about lighting. And in most cases, we do a voluntary compliance first, where we contact the operator and say, hey, we've got a complaint, and been able to resolve most of those with putting additional light deprivation kits onto the lights, either extending the shrouds on them or putting black tarps and whatnot over the tops of the greenhouses. So that sort of in a nutshell are those issues. I will just tell you there are no more licenses being issued by the state for marijuana. They're done. But what is allowed is to move existing licenses. You can move from county to county or within a county from one location to another, or you can aggregate. You can go the state licenses marijuana in tiers of canopy between 10,000, 20,000 and a maximum of 30,000 square feet of canopy. And so depending on that, you can, some of the smaller operators, when the regulations were first put out, these were all small businesses, small operators. And so they were considered small businesses. And so the council and the planning commission at the time wanted to treat them as such and not have overly onerous regulations. What we're seeing happening now is that larger operators are consolidating some of those, or buying out some of those smaller licenses, and then they go back to the state and they have to amend those licenses, and then they can grow more. And sometimes then obviously they have to move to a larger location or a bigger site or a bigger parcel. So that's what you're seeing, but you won't see any more new licenses, at least at the moment, by the state. They're not issuing any more licenses. So we've only had 2, I think, new licenses in the last 2 or 3 years or so. So there was an initial sort of burst of energy when the first licenses were issued by the state, and now that they've kind of shut that down, and there haven't been anything new recently. So other than you're moving from one location to another, or you were a grow operation and you were licensed to grow, and now you want to process, and the code treats those 2 operations differently because the state statutes treat them differently. So that's just kind of the big picture scenarios of how we go about regulating marijuana. And there are some issues. I know the State Liquor and Cannabis Board has the state legislature last year asked them to look to establish an odor task force to specifically look at marijuana odor issues, because this is an issue obviously statewide. It isn't just an issue here in Whatcom County. And however, my understanding is that effort was underfunded and not adequately funded, and so it didn't happen. And so they're back at the legislature right now asking for more money to fund getting some expert guidance on different technology that that growers and processors could use to mitigate those odors. And there are some technologies out there, but so that's the kind of guidance that we don't have. Local counties and cities just don't have that, and so those are things that we would rely on the state for to help us with in terms of regulating odors or figuring out how to manage those odors. The other thing to understand, that's from a legal standpoint, is that our regulations allow odors, right? It's just that the odor at the property boundary can't rise to the level of a nuisance, right? And that is a very tricky legal feat to have to determine. And so there have been, that's not something we typically do. So when we get an odor complaint, we refer those complaints to the Northwest Clean Air Agency. They're the technical experts regarding odor. We are not. PDS is not. And so, and it's in their bylaws as well that they address. And very similar language about, that odors, you cannot emit odors that create a nuisance for your neighbors, but defining a nuisance is a very subjective thing, obviously, as well as, and odors are difficult, they don't necessarily stay around. They can be very transient. We've certainly had odor complaints. We've referred folks to the Northwest Clean Air Agency. We've talked with the Clean Air Agency, and they've told us the issues they have, right? About they get a complaint, they go out the next day, they don't smell anything because the wind has changed, or the operators change their operations, or they close their windows, or, and so it can be a very difficult thing to actually document, as well as proving, well, what is a nuisance and what is not a nuisance, and what is just an odor that, is an odor. So those are kind of some of the problematic issues and that we're facing. So again, this is already docketed. Question for you guys is really tonight is just about the, whether you want to recommend a moratorium. That's a policy choice that the Planning Commission and the council have, and not something we have an opinion on or get involved in. But would it be, ultimately take the direction of the council on? So that's all I've got. Any questions you guys have of me?
There are some questions. Commissioner Desmati.
I'll start with just a few key questions, and then may come back to more. So the first key question is that how will this moratorium affect the particular operation that's raised the most concern? Several dozen complaints letters that at least I've seen in the last few weeks. And how does this moratorium separate from what will be on the docket? And when will the docketed item be discussed as far as your estimate?
So the docket item as to when is, I think would certainly depend upon whether or not there was a moratorium or not. So I can't answer that question right now. You guys know, we've got you booked out through the end of the year already on the existing docket. Items that have been backlogged for over a year because of the time it took to get through the Cherry Point amendment. So we've got a huge backlog with you guys to get through.
For example, I know how passionate you are about getting wind on the docket, getting wind.
Right. Well, the wind energy is a favorite of yours, and that's actually that's been referred to the Climate Impact Advisory Committee, and I understand they're hung up trying to get the climate action plan done first, and then of course with COVID and everything else. So there's a whole domino effect of things. But the other aspect of your question, Atul,
was about the impact of the Saturn group.
Oh yeah. So that there's a permit application in for that one, and I don't really want to talk too specifically about existing permit applications, but there is a permit application and it's vested, right, under the current code, and it's processing, and staff's conducting a review of that and asking additional questions of the applicant of that. So a moratorium would not affect that application.
Hey, Commissioner Mayberry.
Okay, sorry. So are hoop houses considered an outdoor grow?
Hoop houses?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned 30,000 square feet is the absolute max per grow. Is that correct?
That's my understanding from the LCB regs, yes.
Okay, because that is less than an acre, and what we've been talking about is multiple acres, I believe. So there's got to be something going on at that specific one that's not kosher.
And I would just add regarding any questions about enforcement, that's a liquor cannabis board law or rule, right, on those tiers and what is allowed to be grown. That's not something that is in our regulation. So from an enforcement standpoint, if there's an alleged that there was a growing greater canopy cover than was allotted in your state license, and that's an enforcement issue for the Liquor and Cannabis Board. We don't have any authority there.
As far as permits that the county would process, would that include a square foot expansion of an outdoor grow?
If their license changed, right? So if they went back to the LCB and asked to do something different than what was previously approved by us, then yes, but it would depend on the particular application.
So with this grow in particular, they wouldn't necessarily be coming to the county and asking to increase their 4 acres to 8 necessarily.
My understanding is this application is, there was a grow application approved previously, and the application that's now pending is to do processing in addition to that grow operation.
Okay. And then I know that there are ways to measure chemical concentration within the air. It surprises me that there hasn't been some kind of limit actually set that could be followed up with enforcement. The state doesn't have any, you mentioned nuisance levels, but whatever compound is causing everyone to not have happy lives, I'd imagine that there's a way to test that. But that's not set up as far as you know?
Our conversations with the Northwest Clean Air Agency are that they use, that's the sniff test. I understand there are what's the word I'm looking for? Tools. There are instruments that can do that, but they're not currently used, is my understanding.
Okay.
And or there's no state law or any local law on, on the volatile organic compounds and whatever odors they might produce. I'm not aware of any particular metrics that are in place anywhere.
Fair enough. That's all I had.
Commissioner McClendon.
I want to follow up on a question. You said that the docket, the item as a docketed item would be addressed depending on whether or not there was a moratorium. Did you mean that if a moratorium was adopted, that it would move up on the list? It would be addressed sooner?
Or just it would allow us more time.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
But, okay. So the other thing is you said that the one growing operation that is the subject of many of these comments and complaints has a pending permit application that has been vested. Did I get that correct?
Yes.
So does the county code require that the applicant have a legal license with the state to grow marijuana? And
Yes.
do you confirm that?
Yes.
Okay, so that could be leverage in because they have a pending application that you could say, well, go back and prove that everything you're doing right now is legal. Is that a reasonable thing to do?
I would think so.
Okay.
Again, I can't speak for another agency, but that's up to the Liquor and Cannabis Board.
No, but I mean, for you, because you have power to approve or not applications, and you have an obligation under the county code to ensure that the applicant has a legal license. I mean, it seems to me a legal license also includes, if they're already operating under a license, that they're operating legally. So, I mean, you could just say, okay,
yeah,
not going to do anything until you prove everything you're doing right now is legal.
Right. So as a part of our permit review, right, we consult with the LCB and we would make sure that whatever provisions that are going to be in our permit are consistent with the provisions that's in their state license. Whether they comply with that is another issue, right? And if they might, for example, hypothetically exceed the canopy growth that was allowed in their state license, that's not something we're going to go out and inspect on. That's something that's up to the LCB to enforce.
Okay.
Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, here I am. Well, I've been reading the document listed as a Skagit moratorium and trying to wrap my head around what they're actually going to accomplish. And pardon me if I'm confused about this. If somebody has a permit to do something in your county that is basically an agricultural with a small a activity, it would, and they have acquired property in the rural or agricultural zones to conduct that activity. It seems like for what I'm reading the finding of facts from the Skagit moratorium is that outdoor growing should not be allowed. So I'm just wondering if outdoor growing on land in rural or agriculturally zoned areas wouldn't normally be something that's allowed, and whether the county has any right to tell these people with the state permits that they can't operate in these areas. So I'm just trying to figure out what the heck a moratorium would be on and what we have a right to put a moratorium on.
So, I mean, it's a policy, every county, every city has a policy choice to make on whether they allow marijuana or they don't. Some communities have prohibited those operations entirely. And I think the state attorney general weighed in years ago after I-502 passed and said that was, that was an appropriate thing to do. So every jurisdiction makes up its own choice on how far or they want to regulate these activities.
Thanks.
Commissioner Nesmani.
Two questions. First question is regarding odor. A couple of the commenters in their letters specifically said that the Northwest Clean Air Agency is not addressing outdoor marijuana. Is that not true from your understanding, Director Personius?
Not addressing?
What I heard, I read in a couple of the comment letters is that the Northwest Clean Air Agency is not providing resources to address odor issues from outdoor marijuana grow operations. That is what the letter said after conversations that some of the people in the community had with the Northwest Clean Air Agency.
I think that's a question you have to ask, has to be asked and answered by the Northwest Clean Air Agency. I can't speak for that agency. Okay,
that's the first question. But I just want to state that for the record, that that's what a couple of the letters say. The second question is that can a moratorium be applied to the issuance of permits rather than the acceptance of applications? Could the county implement a moratorium which actually provided a moratorium on the issuance of permits so you couldn't issue a permit?
I think that's probably a question for the lawyers to have to answer.
Okay, so you don't know for sure about that answer, but anyway, we would be passing a resolution, so we can ask for illegal things in a resolution because it's a resolution.
Well,
but I'm joking. But of course, is this something that we could put in the resolution and then the lawyers could weigh in on that?
Well, the council, I believe, when they have a moratorium on the acceptance of permits for, for example, for the gosh, it's been so long, for the export of fossil fuel, unrefined fossil fuels from Cherry Point. Yeah. So that's how that was worded. So.
Well, I'm bringing up the idea that if there was a moratorium in the issuance of permits, that could have a direct impact on this particular project. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, I would suggest I would suggest that the lawyers would not recommend that approach.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was asking. All right, that's my question.
Commissioner Lund.
I'm wondering if staff could maybe quantify the potential motion as written, how many applications would be impacted by the moratorium as the draft motion is written? What are we talking about? It sounds like the state really isn't in the issue or in the business of issuing new permits at this time. So I'm just wondering how many, what's coming before you that would be impacted by this moratorium?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I think staff tells me we've had like 2 applications in the last couple of years. So not, and I think those might have been for moving operations that moved from one, were already permitted or had a license somewhere else and were moved here. So not that they were a new grow or a new license from LCB. So, and as I said, there are no new licenses being issued by the state. So it's just any potential moves of an existing operator within the county or outside the county that would want to move to the county. And I don't, yeah, we wouldn't know how many, but I don't think it's, based on the fact we've had 2 in the last 2 or 3 years, I don't think it's a huge number.
Okay.
Commissioner McClendon.
So my first impulse is to not do a moratorium because of, well, we just need to proceed as we are. But it's clear to me that there's some major issues with the way the code is written at the moment, and that and the county council has already decided that they want to look at it. So the idea that, I actually want to comment on something that was said a meeting or 2 ago about all the new application building permits that were submitted right under the wire before the new code requirements went into effect on February 1. That really bugs the hell out of me. And so I would like to move this motion to recommend to the county council that they adopt a moratorium. And do you want me to read I'll go with the language Mr. Personas has provided here. Do I need to read that?
Go ahead, just a second. Do you have a copy of that?
What?
I'm trying to pick it up also, but if you can go ahead and read it.
Okay. Due to concerns raised by the public regarding offsite impacts, e.g. odors, lighting, and potentially excessive water use from outdoor marijuana growing and processing operations, the Planning Commission recommends the county council consider implementing an emergency moratorium on acceptance of applications for outdoor marijuana growing and processing operations, and work with PDS to revise those regulations to address the public concerns. And that's a motion.
Second.
Commissioner Hanson.
Just to clarify for me, if somebody had a state permit and wanted to, say, increase their operation, consolidate their operation, et cetera, use some property in Whatcom County for that operation, what permit would they need to get that we would be issuing or withholding?
Those regulations are included in your packet, and essentially if they're already in existing use, is that what you're asking, Commissioner?
Let's say they have a license and an existing use in Whatcom County, and do they need a permit to expand it or to site it in a different area, et cetera?
Yes, if they want to expand it beyond what the state license allowed them to do and what our local permit allowed them to do, then yes, they would need a new permit or a revision to that permit.
But what if they had like, 50,000 square feet and they had 25,000 square feet on one site and 25,000 square feet on another site, and they want to consolidate or move one of the sites? Do they need a permit for that?
I would say likely if they're changing a site, changing a location, or if they're going to a new location, then yes, they would need a new permit.
Sure, Mayberry.
How quickly could this be moved through? I just ask because Mr. Personius just got finished with a flood of building applications, and I wonder what the consequences of a delay in this moratorium being enacted could result in.
I think from my recollection of interim moratorium language that's authorized in the state statutes, I think they're 6 months at a time. They're only good for 6 months at a time, and then you have to have a work plan to change the regulations that you're specifically addressing with the moratorium. So
but how quickly could it be enacted is what I'm
talking about the moratorium itself. There's no you have to do the language, so the legal counsel would come up with the language, and then the council would could adopt it. It does not require, my recollection is it doesn't require a public hearing until some months after you've adopted it. So you can adopt it very quickly, and then you have to have a public hearing, versus most normal code requirements. As you guys know, you have to have a public hearing before you adopt it. So an emergency moratorium, it's not. That is you're exempted from that public hearing requirement prior to adoption of it.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I have a question on the proposed language. So it says a moratorium on accepting of applications for outdoor marijuana growing or processing. But if you had an existing outdoor grow facility that was applying for something that wasn't modifying or expanding the actual growing portion of the operation, so maybe there's another building on the site that they use for storage or break room, and so they wanted to expand or permit something new for that, would this moratorium affect that at all? Or would it just be on the growing and processing aspect of the operation?
Again, it would depend on whether or not what was authorized in their existing permit. And if they had room within their existing permit to change operations without exceeding the permit limitations or the permit conditions, then no, they wouldn't be affected by this. But if they wanted to significantly change their operations, grow their operations, or change from growing to processing, or increase the amount of canopy that they grew and or they processed, they would more likely be subject to the moratorium. And I'm sorry, I can't get any more specific than that at this point. But.
Are there more questions for Director Personius? Thank you, Mark. Oh,
thank you, Council.
we have a motion here. Is there discussion on the motion? Okay, we got a second. Commissioner Desmani.
So I think that this, I'm going to vote for this because it moves the ball forward, shows a response to the community concern, asks the council to consider this, hopefully prioritize it on their docket. And, we can't actually make the code changes here at the Planning Commission. Obviously, it has to be dealt with at the County Council. So I think it's a good way to move the ball along. So for that reason, I think I'm going to support it. go for it.
Any other discussion on the motion? Okay, thing we have done. Tammy, would you read the motion back for us?
Sure. Due to concerns raised by the public regarding off-site impacts, example, odors, lighting, and potentially excessive water use from outdoor marijuana growing and processing operations, the Planning Commission recommends the County Council consider implementing an emergency moratorium on acceptance of applications for outdoor marijuana growing and processing operations, and work with PDS to revise those regulations to address the public concerns.
Thank you. Very good. Tammy, would you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Okay. Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmonte,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Bart.
Yes.
Okay, 9 ayes, passes.
Okay. Now,
Mark has his hand up.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Commissioners. We will pass that motion on to the council at their next meeting, and I'll keep you guys informed as to the process of that issue. I have to run, but thank you, and I'll leave you in the capable hands of Cliff and Ryan to carry on with the SMP discussions.
Mark, thanks so much for moving this along.
Yep.
and just want to bring this up before Cliff talks. We had a motion to lay something on the table for this meeting. And want to make sure we address that tonight. So at this point, then Cliff and Ryan, I'm sorry, just a moment. Commissioner Lund, go ahead. You had your hand up there. There we go.
I put it down. Sorry about that.
Okay. Cliff Strong and Ryan Erickson, go ahead.
Okay, so in continuing your review of the draft amendments to our codes for the SMP update, last time you left off on critical areas, we had gone over we had explained all the amendments, the policy amendments that we had been proposing, but it sounded like the commission had a lot of questions and or suggestions and discussion to do. So I believe that's where we are now.
So commissioners, that was brief, Cliff. Thank you. Commissioners, go ahead. Where would you like to take them?
Trying to get you guys done by 9:30.
I'll ask Commissioner Mosseri. I believe you were the one that had a motion that we tabled. Did you want to discuss that now?
Is that concerning the floodway?
I believe it was, and I think we were wanting some more information.
Yeah, in the memo, they noted that Paula wasn't available at this meeting, so I think we're going to discuss it at the next one.
Okay, then we will leave that lay on the table. Thank you. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, this is a question for staff first. The memo that we got from the Agricultural Advisory Committee, it mentioned requirements for above ground manure storage, and it didn't mention where in the code this was referenced. I was wondering if you could help me find that.
Sure. So it's not, we hadn't made those changes, but if you recall from the public comments we got on the draft from resources, FutureWise et al., they were suggesting that. So I think the AAC had gotten wind of that, and we're just informing you of what they recommend regarding that issue.
Okay.
So we haven't added any text that would require that, but I know some groups are pushing for it. So
Fair enough.
Commissioner Lund.
I guess this is a question for Commissioner Mayberry, just to clarify process on the proposed motions that were sent out today. And is your intention that we consider those individually? And I'm asking just because I don't feel some of the comments that we've received seem substantive and came in either yesterday. The environmental report came in yesterday. I know we received a comment from Resources and FutureWise that they didn't have enough time with 1 day's notice to prepare comment or give thoughtful consideration. And I'm kind of in the same boat. When we receive motions, such a bulk of motions on the same day, it's hard to be prepared to move forward. And I think that echoes Commissioner Hansen's comment earlier this evening. So I'm just wondering if your intention was to move them forward together as a bulk set of amendments, or just do them individually.
No, I was planning on doing them individually, and I apologize. I worked so hard to put this together and apparently wasn't fast enough for you, Jim. But yes. So I mean, if you guys aren't ready to go over these, I completely understand. But I feel like one at a time, at least. I know that Ed Miller spent a lot of time coming up with his reasonings, and I talked with him and tried to put those in my own words and put them into actual motions. But yeah.
And I totally appreciate your work to move the ball forward. So I don't want to say that is dissuading your effort to do that.
No, and I'm saying that in jest, but yeah, I was planning on doing them one at a time.
Commissioner Desmani.
So the thing I'm wondering if we could discuss today is the issue of above ground tanks. And I'd like to just suggest that that's something that I'm open to discussing today, rather than going through the kind of the specific amendments, if the commission think that's a good idea. So perhaps that's one topic we could get accomplished today.
Hold that thought there. We have a couple of people would like to have their hands up. Commissioner McClendon. We'll get back to you in a moment, Commissioner Desmani. But Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
So this is not my technical area of technical expertise. I mean, none of it is, but certainly not all these, the concerns brought up by Miller Environmental Services or Commissioner Mayberry's motions that he's proposing. And I really rely on staff to be able to look at these things and tell me, does this make sense? Is this gonna, is there some state law that says it has to be this way or that way or whatever? And so I would like to ask that to make sure that Cliff is able to go through these. I mean, I want to give them full consideration, but to go through these and give us his best thoughts on them for the next meeting.
Cliff,
Yep, there. So you're talking about the recommendations from Mr. Miller that have been passed forward? I'm sorry, I lost you for a minute.
Yes.
Okay, and trust me, Ryan and I scrambled to try to think, come up with responses to them. So we've written up responses to most of them that I'll be putting in that synopsis of public comments. Every public comment I get, I put into that table and then I repost it. So, and I kind of curtail them a bit so you get the gist of it, but I also provide our responses to that. So Ryan and I are ready to talk about each of these if that's what the commission wishes. But again,
Okay.
I know somebody pointed out that other groups wanted to be here for this discussion too. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I get the packet and I read the packet. If it doesn't have your analysis in it, I'm sorry, I forget to go look at the.
Well, and I haven't
on the
posted that
website.
yet. We're still finalizing it.
Yeah, okay.
But we can certainly, Ryan and I can certainly go over each one orally if that's what the commission wishes. But it sounds like some folks might want to wait for other people to be present. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not asking for it today. I'm asking for
Okay.
it in writing.
Yep. We can certainly do that in your next memo.
Commissioner Hanson. I wanted to thank John for his good work on this too, and I know it's not so easy just to pull it out of your ear because this is technical stuff, and Mr. Miller had to work on it a lot. I sort of echo Commissioner McClendon's desire to have a chance to review this better because having read through it, there are a number of these points that I might choose to vote in favor of as far as these amendments, but I need some more information before I can make up my mind. So I would be better disposed to support some of these amendments if we had the time to really review them.
Okay, and before we move on here, Commissioner Desmonte made a suggestion that we look at tanks this evening. Are there other people that would like to do that? Kind of.
Anybody can suggest a topic. They don't have to have our approval.
Well, you're correct, but he was asking if we wanted to focus on that. So, Commissioner Mayberry, and then we'll give the floor back to Commissioner Desmonte.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I think it would be better, Cliff, if you made comments. I mean, use Ed Miller's, I guess, reasoning or whatever, but the specific code changes that I'm asking for.
Yep.
Because so maybe just respond to my motions, I think would probably be a better way of doing that. Because me and Ed did spend some time going over his statements and requests and how to what was possible, I guess, and how to actually put it into the code. So it's not fully Ed's letter is not fully reflected in my motions, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. But I think the action is right. The action that he suggested.
For the most part, but not all of them.
Okay. And I haven't sat down because I just got yours too. So I haven't sat down and compared to see if they're identical or not.
Fair enough.
Is that something the commission wants me to do now, or I'm still not clear? I'm seeing heads shaking up and down sort of, and some saying no. So
I think it would.
I'll let the commission work it out what you want to do, and then you tell me.
I'm in favor of a written response. I guess I think that lets everybody.
Okay.
Everybody,
and that I can do. I can get that into your next memo, which goes out I think next Tuesday. So I have tomorrow and Monday to finalize those. And then we also have Paula scheduled to come to your next meeting. So
Commissioner Desmani, go ahead. We put you on hold for a little bit, so go ahead.
No, I'm fine with putting it all off as well. So I'm.
But you were talking about tanks.
Yes, yeah, but it doesn't seem like that's there's a lot of enthusiasm for that right now. We can certainly talk about it later in context. So.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. Go ahead.
Ryan, okay, yeah. So I just want to let everybody know that your next meeting, I am going to be late because I have a hearing at my current position. So with my
you know how late, Ryan?
I introduced the new CAO in the town of Friday Harbor, and I have a hearing on a rezone.
So do you know how late, Ryan?
I have no idea.
I mean, you can't do two jobs at the same time?
I've been doing it very well. I was ready for this meeting, but you guys had another agenda item ahead of time. And so I'll work with Cliff to answer those questions, but I will be a little late.
All right. And we'll have Paula up first, so she doesn't have to stay for the whole meeting, and that'll give you some time too, Ryan. But
yeah, so far I've had 0 comments on the rezone, and I've had 0 comments on my CAO. So and I haven't even presented anything yet, so nobody wants to even care in Friday Harbor. So I should be pretty short.
Commissioner Lund.
You want us to come to your Friday Harbor meeting?
Yeah, maybe
raise the ruckus.
You know, spice some things up. They seem to be pleasantly enjoying their lives and don't want to come to a night meeting.
I was just going to say, now that Ryan said that, he's doomed. But I would just say I'm sensing a general tenor from staff, and understandably so, about wanting to move forward. We have a significant backlog as a group, and I would be willing to, since this is feeling like it's going to be an abbreviated meeting and we're not advancing some of the agenda items that staff had hoped we might consider, that we work longer in our next session. So I would be willing to do that so we can continue to move forward. And I think it's just good when we work longer to have that stated as an intention up front. So I'm just throwing that out for consideration now.
Commissioner Hanson.
Well, since we have got some comments on the manure lagoon issue, and it might be valuable to take Atul up on his suggestion and just have a general discussion on that. So when we get to the point where we might need to make a decision, we'll be better prepared to do so.
Commissioner Desmani.
And I just realized that there's people who've come to this meeting who are subject matter experts that I would certainly be open to hearing from them if the others are.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Do you have a specific expert and subject matter that you'd like them to talk on?
I guess that's addressing me specifically the lagoons and the tanks issue.
Well, we got Ryan. Ryan, go ahead. You want to address this a little bit?
Yeah, on the tanks and the manure lagoons, you may want to have Chris and the CD come, who actually designs the manure lagoons, and the CD kind of helps get the grants there's an order and things like that for these tanks. So they may be a good resource to have to talk about why and why not and their impacts.
Ryan, would you go ahead and make sure that that Cliff gets that forward so that I don't think we have it in the minutes because it was a little bit fuzzy, but if we can get that, Tammy can get it in. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'd also recommend that Joshua Fleischman from the Ag Advisory Committee is invited to talk since he drafted up this memo. And I don't know that much about manure lagoons, but I'd imagine he knows a little more.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I would throw it out there. You know, we've been dealing with this exhibit for a couple times now. I know we're wanting to hold off on some of Commissioner Mayberry's stuff to get more information, which is great. Are there other items besides that commissioners have that we could try to tackle today just to get some of this off? You know, if other people have issues, because we often talk about issues and motions that haven't been sent out ahead of time. So I would be happy to tackle other issues besides Commissioner Mayberry's.
Commissioner Hanson.
Pardon me if I lost focus on this, but as I understand, the state CAFO rules are up for revision. So we're only talking about standards for dairy farms that fall below the threshold of the CAFO ordinances. Is that what we're talking about?
Do you have an answer for that, Cliff?
Yeah, I'm trying. I don't know enough about these things to answer that properly. I mean, is it only the CAFOs that have manure lagoons, or are there other? I just don't know. That's why it would be helpful to have somebody who knows what they're talking about on this.
Honest man.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I think it would also be good to know what the request is. Maybe I missed it, but when in some of the memos from Resources or whatever group was requesting additional manure lagoon requirements, and where those requirements land. I based off of Josh's memo, it seems like it was limited to the shorelines. But it would be good to actually have the requested language in front of us as well.
I can read what they wrote right now if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Let's see, I get to the fluff. And they request that requirements be added that any manure holding facility permitted within the shoreline jurisdiction be in the form of above ground tanks or towers instead of earthen lagoons. In order to be protective of our waterways and groundwater, please make manure holding facilities a shoreline conditional use. And then similarly, along the same lines, to reduce the risk of contamination from runoff and flooding and seepage, consider making it mandatory for any new or replaced manure lagoons to be above ground or in tanks or towers. So basically the same comment, but make them, in the shoreline jurisdiction. Any sewer facilities would have to be a tank or tower and a CUP is what they had suggested in their original letters.
Commissioner McClendon.
I'm not sure I'm following all this discussion, but isn't the issue of a manure lagoon or versus a tank or whatever, or something above ground in the shoreline area an issue about flooding? Isn't that about the tank working properly under normal conditions or not, or leaking into the river or the bay. I would think the issue would be, because it is so low lying, in a flood event, it would just get inundated and the whole thing would go, go all over the place. And so by putting it above ground, at least you have some additional height to avoid it from being flooded out and washed out. Does that make sense? I don't know.
I've heard people speak both ways on this, and there's good arguments for them and good arguments against them. So for me, it's hard to know what the real truth is. I think Ryan suggested maybe having Chris from the CD come in and talk to you is probably one of the better ideas.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing Cliff just did. No one's going to build a manure lagoon so that it washes away every time we have a flood. And I don't know if that's ever happened. I mean, maybe somewhere in the state or in the world, but I don't know of any instances where that's happened in our county.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue that people tend to raise is that the ponds tend to leak, but I also understand that the standards have been raised so that they're thicker liners on them and stuff, and they don't anymore. But where the truth lies, I have no idea.
Commissioner Tesmani.
Yeah, in general, unless it's overwhelmingly obvious, I think the public sector shouldn't handle design decisions. So in general, whether the tank, we're talking about what kind of mechanism for storage, that's, the engineers can do that.
Commissioner Hanson.
I did follow the CAFO CAFO rules modification discussion a couple of years back, and the issue I seem to see is that with the storm events that accompany flooding, there was a challenge with the lagoons being overtopped by the rainwater accumulation, and that fed into calculations about excess capacity needing to be designed into the lagoons. And my understanding was that this was an issue that was handled in the CAFO on the state level. And so again, my question would be, how is this dealt with on dairy farms or stockyards that are below the threshold of the CAFO permits?
Commissioner Hanson, is that a question directed for Cliff?
I think that would be a good one for the conservation district. So I'm not meaning to necessarily just ask questions that people can't answer, but I just wanted to bring that point up of that seemed to have been the concern.
I'd like to ask Cliff a question. Cliff, we went over this, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, and we discussed lagoons versus tanks or aerial. Were you a part of that process?
I was not.
Okay. I know that we have some extensive discussion about cost and we have figures quoted, and so I just was hopeful that we had access to that data or the comments from before.
Do you remember what it was in regards to? Maybe I can track down who the staff was, although they're probably not here anymore. So.
I am not certain what it was, but I know that it was pointed out that some of the ones when you do a tower, the cost is so prohibitive, and that the tanks are expensive, not as much as a tower, but prohibitive to the point of economically not feasible, particularly in tower.
And just to respond to Commissioner Mayberry about inviting Josh, I don't know that he would be helpful. He's just the staff for the Ag Committee, but he's not a farmer. I can talk to him, but I think Chris at CD would be better. And I'm sure Resources is listening in and would want to be a part of this as well, since it was their suggestion that started this.
Yeah, I just say that just because they clearly talked about it at one of their recent meetings where they wouldn't have drafted the memo, but.
Right, and I think all Josh could do is reiterate what they said. I don't know that he's an expert on this. But I will talk to him.
If he, and I don't, again, I'm not a dairy farmer, but I know this got hashed out. There's a bunch of lawsuits that happened. I can't remember how many years ago in Eastern Washington, but there are now counter lawsuits happening by those surviving dairy farms for falsified information that the EPA put out. So
Sounds like we all know a little bit about a big issue.
It's a big issue, and it's not cut and dry. So
yeah.
That's all I have to say.
So commissioners, where would you like to go tonight, or what would you like to do? Commissioner Masseri.
I'll just ask again if there's any other issues with chapter 16 other than what Commissioner Mayberry has. I wouldn't mind talking about them rather than waiting to do Commissioner Mayberry's next time and then having to have another meeting after that on the same chapter.
Commissioner McClendon.
I have a tiny little thing on page. These are notes I wrote like a month ago, so if I'm confused, I apologize. Page 97, and let me look at page 97. Yeah, on line 30, it refers to an ecological lift.
Can you, because if you're looking at the older version, some of the line
Oh,
numbers
you've
may have
changed it.
changed. So if you
16,
can.
16, 760.
Okay,
Habitat conservation areas.
okay, and then subsection.
The third line.
Let me just do a quick. Oh, there it is. Oh, I see.
Is the term ecological lift defined?
It is. Ryan, you want to handle that?
Yeah,
Basically, when you're making things better.
Yeah, just
Well, I get the gist, but it seems like a odd word choice.
it's a term that is becoming more and more popular. The legislature has even talked about making ecological lift a requirement of the GMA. It's just a term that you use to say that leaving it better than it is.
Yeah, under our current rules, we can't make people make up for past mistakes, only what they're doing. Ecological lift is going beyond what you're impacting and doing better. So you're kind of lifting the environment up.
Okay. Even though that's becoming a popular term, I would suggest that's kind of vague.
Okay.
Unless it's specifically a term that's defined in the definitions.
I'd be happy to define it in the definition.
Okay. Is it, yeah, I mean, if you want to use it, let's define it because it's kind of, I don't know, pick something up. I don't know what it is. All right, that's all I had. That was my little thing.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'd just like to encourage whoever is willing to reach out to Ed, get his perspective on maybe if you guys have questions over his original letter, why he's concerned about certain parts of the changes to the code over the next 2 weeks.
Commissioner McClendon.
Actually, I'd like to talk about this reasonable use exception because two different people on two sides of the issue have brought it up and I had already made note of it. The first thing is, I don't know where it is in the code. So could someone tell me where to find it?
I can. It's 1616-270, reasonable use exceptions.
16:2.
And
Okay.
that's on or about page 30.
All right, I'm just gonna write that down. So I'd like to talk about this standard size home of up to 4,000 square feet. I mean, that's humongous. Why is that considered a standard size home? And I assume that's the footprint.
Well, it's the total amount of disturbance you can do within the critical areas.
So you're saying it's not just the house?
It's not just the house, it's
Driveway.
driveways, landscaping, grass, all that stuff. So how much you can impact a critical area.
Okay,
And our code prior to the 2017 update, it was set at 2,500 square feet. We upped it to 4,000. And Ryan, perhaps you can explain why. I can't remember. That was something you had proposed. Now we're proposing to go back to the 2,500 that we've always had, because we've changed the way this works. And as somebody pointed out earlier, that reasonable use exceptions really are supposed to be the last process for getting economic use out of your property.
Yeah, and this has a bigger discussion that we need to talk about, I think, before we even get to the size. And that is the notion of reasonable use in Whatcom County has not been in accordance with the state guidance. It has been a Whatcom County-ism on how they use it. So I want to go to the Department of Commerce's handbook on the critical areas ordinances and their updates. We can go ahead and put this out to you guys on it, but it says, in addition to exemptions and allowed uses, cities and counties must allow a minimal reasonable use of property if such use would otherwise be denied by the critical areas regulations. The Fifth Amendment and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution provide individuals with protection from being deprived of the use of one's property without due process or just compensation. That is why you have a reasonable use. It is not anything like a variance. And so it goes further. It says, unlike variances, the purpose of a reasonable use exception permit is not to allow general development within critical areas, but to allow only the minimal reasonable use of the property so as to avoid a constitutional taking. That is the guidance from the state of Washington on how to use reasonable use. The way that we reframed the writing of our CAO is to match this guidance. So it is not what is what to relieve a hardship, because relieving a hardship is a variance process. This is what do we have to do to provide use for a property that is not a constitutional taking. So that's the framework we have to think about when we're looking at this regulation.
in some jurisdictions have said that's just being able to pitch a tent on your property.
And
Yeah,
there's
go
other
out,
guidance
okay.
in the older versions of this, which is the 2018, it says that reasonable use is usually left up to the courts to decide and not at the local jurisdiction level. And so that's why I'm recommending going back to 2,500 square feet. It's what we have in the Shoreline Master Program for that reasonable use is 2,500 square feet. You get 500 square feet for lawn. And so in essence, 3,000 is how we apply it, even though 2,500 is how it's actually written. And so we have to think about how it's supposed to be used and not how we have been using it in past critical area ordinances in Whatcom County, because we have not been following state guidance.
And talk again about how the hearing examiner questioned this, our system.
And so under the current CAO, the way it's written, and after we pass this CAO, I'm going to recommend to Mark that we follow the CAO as written. And it says that before reasonable use, you have to exhaust all other avenues, basically. You have to exhaust all other, I forgot the exact words in it. But anyways, you have to exhaust all other avenues before you hit reasonable use, which would mean you have to have a variance first. You have to be denied a variance before you go to reasonable use. And so, and I know that's not how we've been applying it. And that's also not how previous CAOs were written prior to 2017. But when the hearing examiner saw that, he's like, well, that makes no sense. I should not deny a variance and then have an administratively approved process. And so we didn't go back to how, we went back to how it was prior to the 2017 CAO, but we've been applying the code, not how it's written, but how the guidance of our hearing examiner. And then now we're saying, okay, let's fix this and go back to what the state says a reasonable use exception should be.
And if you recall, this all was explained in the memo to you, your 5th memo on this, dated January 19th, 2001. So there's written explanation as to why we did this there, if you want to go back and look at that.
So I have a note on page 6 of that January 19th memo that says we amended the 25 square feet back up to 4,000.
You did.
Okay. I didn't vote for it. Okay.
And just know that Ryan and I, when we go to council, we'll probably try to convince them to go to the 2,500.
Okay.
Everything else you guys have done so far, we're fine with, but that one is kind of a biggie.
Okay.
Commissioner Hampton.
I guess I just want to say I'm with staff on this. If someone chooses to build in a critical area, it seems like minimal impact would be quite reasonable. And I like native plants. I think they make wonderful landscaping, and they can serve as a rain garden as well.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I just got a question of procedure. How many times do we get to go back and rehash the same issues?
Thank you, Commissioner Mayberry.
That's an actual question. I'm curious. I know in the past we've stayed away from going back and rehashing issues when we've had votes on. I just don't know what our standards are.
I just wanted to say it was about to make that point that we voted on an amendment and maybe we want to change that. I'm not saying we should, but we need to, instead of expressing our opinions about something we've done, we should move on and be productive.
And Mr. Chair, just remember that you still will have a public hearing on this, so you may get new information from people or something that causes you to change your mind. So far, you've just tentatively approved all these things to go to public hearing.
Thank you, Cliff.
Yep.
Commissioners, what would you like to do? I'd ask you where you want to go, but you're all home already for the most part.
Is there a bar we can all go to?
Isn't there a tiki bar somewhere?
In Stanwood.
I propose we wrap up.
Go ahead, Commissioner Desmani.
I propose we wrap up.
I agree. I feel like we're just sitting here to sit here.
Commissioner Desmani, is that a motion to adjourn?
Yes, it's a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Barry, were you making a second?
Yes, I will second that.
Is there any discussion? Oh, Commissioner Masseri, would you like to speak to that?
I just have a question for staff. What, obviously, it's, you never know how quick we get through things, but is there any kind of projections on or forecasting on us moving forward? How many more meetings you perceive we might need before we can get to a hearing and move through this?
Yes, I was mulling that over today, in fact. And a lot of it depended on what you guys got through tonight, and it wasn't a whole heck of a lot. So I anticipate the next meeting, we'll have Paula, and then we'll go, I'll have written responses to Mr. Mayberry's suggestions. However, how many you guys want to take up is up to you. I'll also include the Title 22 in case we can move forward onto that. And I also have the revisions to the SMP map to show you. So it's those things that I feel you guys need to get through in workshop, and then we can go to a public hearing. At this point, it's looking, I mean, it sounds like you're gonna need at least 2 meetings to go through this stuff, but you may surprise me, I don't know. So that would be the 1st of April for a hearing. I was kind of hoping for the end of March, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen now.
Isn't there some statutory requirements to work through this? How are we looking at that?
Where council is supposed to adopt it by June 31st. Now, it's not like they take away your birthday if you don't make that deadline, but
They can take.
I believe there's planning commissions all over the state that are behind. I think we're actually not that far behind compared to other planning commissions.
I suspect you're right.
Ryan, go ahead. Keeping in mind, we have a motion to adjourn on this.
I know. I just want to let everybody know that eventually Commerce will and Ecology will not fund your grants for building roads, improving your water, drinking water, and your sewer bills and infrastructure, I mean. So that's where I'm currently at in Friday Harbor. And so eventually you will get there if you don't pass something.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. Is everybody okay with adjourning? Thumbs up? Okay, meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Oh, Ryan, no wonder they need to fix things.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't even seeing it. Okay, and then we can go straight to end.